merely a rifle she carried, until the colonel caught sight of the numbers scratched in iron. Maria Santos clutched her rifle tighter as the morning mist rolled across the training ground. She had been carrying the same weapon for 3 months now, ever since she joined the military academy. The other recruits often complained about their equipment, but Maria never said a word about hers. There was something different about her rifle, something she discovered on her very first day. The weapon looked ordinary enough from a distance. Standard issue, black metal finish, regulation weight. But when Maria first picked it up from the armory, her fingers traced along the stock and felt something unusual. There, carved deep into the iron near the trigger guard, were numbers, not serial numbers in their usual place, but something else entirely. Someone had scratched them there deliberately with great care. The numbers read 47, 23, 11, 89, 156, 2. Maria tried to clean them off that first night in the barracks, thinking they might be some kind of mistake or graffiti. But the digits were etched too deeply into the metal. They had been there for years, maybe decades. The iron around the numbers had begun to rust slightly, giving them an almost bronze appearance against the darker metal of the rifle. During weapons training, Maria performed exceptionally well. Her shots were precise, her handling smooth and natural. The drill sergeant noticed her skill immediately and praised her marksmanship in front of the entire unit. But Maria barely heard the compliments. Her mind kept wandering to those mysterious numbers on her weapon. She began to research the rifle's history during her free time. The armory records showed it had been issued and returned multiple times over the past 20 years. Different soldiers had carried it through various training programs and deployments, but none of the official paperwork mentioned anything about carved numbers or modifications to the weapon. Maria started paying attention to the other rifles in her unit. None of them had similar markings. Some had scratches from use, dents from accidents, or worn spots from handling. But her rifle was the only one with deliberately carved numbers. Someone had taken great risk to etch those digits into military property, which was strictly forbidden. The young recruit found herself staring at the numbers during quiet moments. They seemed to form some kind of code or message. But what could they mean? Were they coordinates? Dates? A combination to something important? The mystery consumed her thoughts more each day. One evening, while cleaning her rifle in the barracks, Maria noticed something else unusual. Under certain lighting, the numbers seemed to catch and reflect light differently than the rest of the metal, almost as if they had been filled with some other material and then worn smooth over time. Her bunkmate, Sarah, noticed Maria's intense focus on the weapon and asked about it. Maria showed her the carved numbers, and Sarah examined them closely under the overhead light. Sarah suggested they might be some kind of memorial or tribute that a previous soldier had made. But Maria sensed there was something more significant about these particular digits. As weeks passed, Maria's curiosity grew stronger. She began having dreams about the numbers, imagining scenarios where they led to hidden treasures, secret messages, or important locations. The rifle felt heavier in her hands, not from its physical weight, but from the weight of the mystery it carried. During one particularly challenging training exercise, Maria's unit was tasked with navigating through a dense forest using only compass readings and map coordinates. As she studied her map, looking at the various numbered grid references, something about the format seemed familiar. The way the numbers on her rifle were separated by dashes reminded her of coordinate systems or reference codes. That night, Maria made a decision. She would find out what these numbers meant, no matter how long it took or what rules she might need to bend. The rifle had chosen her somehow, and she felt responsible for solving its puzzle. Little did she know that her investigation would soon catch the attention of someone far more powerful than a drill sergeant. Colonel Harrison was known throughout the base for his sharp eye and attention to detail. Nothing escaped his notice, especially when it came to his soldiers and their equipment. He had been watching Maria's progress with interest, noting her exceptional performance and dedication. But he had also noticed something else about the young recruit, something that would soon bring their paths together in an unexpected way. Maria decided to approach the base librarian, Mrs. Patterson, who had worked there for over 30 years. If anyone would know about the history of equipment and soldiers, it would be her. The library was housed in an old building that smelled of dust and aging paper, filled with military records, historical documents, and reference materials. Mrs. Patterson was a small, elderly woman with sharp eyes behind thick glasses. When Maria explained her situation and showed her a rubbing of the numbers she had made on paper, the librarian's expression grew thoughtful. She disappeared into the back archives and returned with several thick binders containing equipment logs and soldier records from previous decades. Together, they spent hours going through old paperwork, looking for any mention of rifle modifications or unusual incidents involving weapons. The records were detailed but dry, filled with technical specifications, maintenance reports, and transfer documents. Maria's eyes grew tired scanning through page after page of bureaucratic language and numbered lists. Just as they were about to give up for the day, Mrs. Patterson found something interesting. In a maintenance log from 15 years earlier, there was a note about a rifle being returned with unauthorized markings on the stock. The weapon had been flagged for inspection and possible refinishing, but the process had been canceled due to budget constraints. The serial number on that rifle matched Maria's weapon. Exactly. Mrs. Patterson helped Maria trace the rifle's history backward from that point. The weapon had been issued to a soldier named James Mitchell in 2008. Mitchell had served for 8 years before retiring with honors. But there was something unusual about his service record. During his final deployment, he had been awarded a medal for exceptional service, but the details of his actions were classified. Maria felt her heart racing as she realized she was getting closer to the truth. She asked Mrs. Patterson if there was any way to contact former soldiers, but the librarian explained that privacy regulations prevented sharing personal information about retired military personnel. However, she suggested that Maria could try searching public records or social media platforms on her own time. That evening, Maria spent hours on her laptop searching for information about James Mitchell. She found several people with that name, but none seemed to match the military records she had seen. Social media profiles showed various James Mitchells working in different careers, living in different states with different ages and backgrounds. Growing frustrated, Maria decided to try a different approach. She began researching the time period when Mitchell had served, looking for news articles or military operations that might give her clues about what had happened during his final deployment. She discovered that his unit had been stationed in Afghanistan during a particularly dangerous period, when several high-profile rescue missions had taken place. One article caught her attention. It described a daring nighttime rescue operation where a small team of soldiers had saved several hostages from a heavily guarded compound. The mission had been considered extremely dangerous with very low chances of success. But somehow the team had managed to complete their objective with no casualties. The article didn't mention specific names due to security concerns, but it did mention that the operation had required precise coordination and exceptional marksmanship skills. Maria wondered if James Mitchell had been part of that team, and if the numbers on the rifle were somehow connected to that dangerous mission. Her research was interrupted by a knock on her barracks door. It was late, well past lights out, and Maria quickly closed her laptop. She opened the door to find Sergeant Williams, her drill instructor, looking unusually serious. "Santos," he said quietly, "Colonel Harrison wants to see you in his office first thing tomorrow morning. And bring your rifle." Maria's stomach dropped. Had someone seen her using the library computers after hours? Had Mrs. Patterson reported their research session? Or worse, had the colonel somehow discovered that she was investigating the mysterious numbers on her weapon? She barely slept that night, tossing and turning as she imagined various scenarios for her meeting with the colonel. Would she be disciplined for damaging military property? Would she be kicked out of the program for conducting unauthorized research? The rifle lay in her locker, and she could almost feel the weight of those carved numbers pressing down on her conscience. As dawn broke across the base, Maria prepared for what might be the most important conversation of her military career. She had no way of knowing that Colonel Harrison's interest in her rifle had nothing to do with discipline or punishment. In fact, the colonel had been waiting 15 years for someone exactly like Maria to walk into his office carrying that particular weapon. The mystery was about to deepen in ways that Maria could never have imagined, and the numbers 47, 23, 11, 89, 156, 2 were about to reveal their first secret to someone who had been keeping an even bigger secret for much longer. Colonel Harrison's office was intimidating, filled with military decorations, photographs from various deployments, and shelves lined with thick manuals and strategic documents. Maria stood at attention, her rifle held precisely according to regulations, trying to control her nervousness as the colonel studied her from behind his massive oak desk. The colonel was a tall, imposing man in his 50s with silver hair and intense gray eyes. His uniform was perfectly pressed, and his posture spoke of decades of military discipline. But there was something else in his expression as he looked at Maria, something that seemed almost like recognition, though they had never formally met before. At ease, "Santos?" the colonel said finally, his voice deep and measured. "I understand you've been asking questions about your weapon." Maria's heart sank. Someone had definitely reported her research activities. She began to formulate an apology, but the colonel held up his hand to stop her before she could speak. "Before you say anything," he continued, "I want you to show me exactly what you've discovered." Confused but obedient, Maria carefully placed her rifle on the colonel's desk and pointed to the carved numbers near the trigger guard. The colonel leaned forward, and as his eyes focused on the digits, his expression changed dramatically. The stern military mask slipped for just a moment, replaced by something that looked almost like surprise, or perhaps recognition. The colonel was silent for a long time, studying the numbers with an intensity that made Maria increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a magnifying glass, examining each digit carefully under the enhanced view. 7 to 23, 11, 89, 156, 2, he read aloud slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir," Maria responded, not sure what else to say. The colonel set down the magnifying glass and leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Maria's face. "Santos, what I'm about to tell you is classified information that very few people know. What you do with this information could affect national security, so I need to know that I can trust you completely." Maria nodded vigorously, her curiosity now completely overwhelming her nervousness. "This rifle," the colonel continued, tapping the weapon gently with his finger, "belonged to one of the bravest soldiers I ever served with. His name was James Mitchell, and those numbers represent something extraordinary that happened 15 years ago in Afghanistan." The colonel stood and walked to his window, looking out at the training ground where new recruits were practicing their drills. "Mitchell was part of a special operations team that I commanded during one of the most dangerous missions of the entire war. We were tasked with rescuing 6 American contractors who had been captured by enemy forces and were being held in a heavily fortified compound." Maria listened intently as the colonel described the mission. The intelligence had been limited, the enemy force was estimated to be 3 times larger than their team, and the hostages were being moved to a new location within hours. It was the kind of mission that commanders usually rejected as too risky, but the lives of 6 Americans hung in the balance. "The numbers on that rifle," the colonel continued, "represent the exact coordinates where Mitchell made the shot that saved the entire mission. We had been pinned down by enemy fire, completely surrounded, with no way to retreat or advance. The hostages were about to be executed, and our team was about to be overrun." The colonel returned to his desk and picked up the rifle, holding it with obvious respect. Mitchell spotted an enemy commander positioned on a rooftop approximately 800 meters away. This commander was coordinating the entire attack against us, and his elimination would create enough confusion for us to complete the rescue. Maria realized she was holding her breath as the colonel continued his story. The shot was nearly impossible. Night vision conditions, extreme distance, wind factors, and Mitchell had been wounded in the shoulder during our insertion. But somehow he made that shot with this exact rifle, and it saved all of our lives as well as the 6 hostages. The colonel carefully set the rifle back on the desk. "Mitchell carved those coordinates into the weapon that night, while we were waiting for extraction. He said he never wanted to forget the exact spot where he proved that one person could make a difference when everything seemed hopeless." Maria stared at the numbers with new understanding and respect. They weren't just random digits, they were the precise location of an act of heroism that had saved multiple lives. "But sir?" Maria asked hesitantly. "Why are you telling me this? And why did Mitchell leave the rifle behind?" The colonel smiled for the first time since she had entered his office. "Because, Santos, James Mitchell didn't leave this rifle behind. James Mitchell died in a training accident 2 years after that mission. and he specifically requested in his will that this weapon be returned to active duty rather than retired or displayed in a museum. Maria felt a chill run through her as she realized the significance of carrying a hero's weapon. Mitchell believed, the colonel continued, that this rifle still had important work to do, and that it should find its way to someone who would honor its history and continue its service. I've been watching your performance, Santos, and I believe Mitchell would be proud to know that you're the one carrying his rifle now. Maria left the colonel's office with her mind spinning from everything she had learned. The rifle felt different in her hands now, heavier with history and responsibility. But as she walked back to the barracks, she couldn't shake the feeling that the colonel hadn't told her everything. There had been something in his eyes, a hesitation when she asked certain questions, that suggested more secrets were still hidden. Over the next few days, Maria threw herself into her training with renewed determination. Every time she raised the rifle to her shoulder, she thought about James Mitchell and the impossible shot that had saved lives. Her marksmanship scores improved even further, and she began to feel a strange connection to the weapon, as if Mitchell's skill was somehow transferring to her through the metal and wood. But late at night, when the barracks were quiet, Maria continued her research. She searched for more information about the mission the colonel had described, looking for news articles, military reports, or any other details that might fill in the gaps in the story. What she discovered made her realize that the colonel had only told her part of the truth. The rescue mission in Afghanistan had been even more significant than he had described. According to declassified documents she found online, the 6 hostages weren't just contractors. They were actually undercover intelligence agents who had been gathering critical information about terrorist networks. Their capture had compromised several ongoing operations and put dozens of other agents at risk. Maria also discovered that the mission had been controversial within military leadership. Several commanders had argued against the rescue attempt, believing it was too dangerous and likely to fail. The decision to proceed had come from the highest levels of government, with direct involvement from intelligence agencies. Most interesting of all, Maria found references to something called Operation Compass Rose, which seemed to be connected to the rescue mission but was still highly classified. Every mention of this operation was heavily redacted in the documents she could access, but it appeared to be some kind of ongoing intelligence program that had continued for years after Mitchell's death. Maria began to suspect that the numbers carved into the rifle might be more than just coordinates of a single shot. What if they were part of a larger code or system? What if Mitchell had been involved in something bigger than just one rescue mission? Her suspicions were confirmed when she noticed something odd during weapons maintenance. While cleaning the rifle thoroughly, Maria discovered that the carved numbers weren't just etched into the surface of the metal. Using a small flashlight, she could see that the carving continued deeper into the stock, forming a small hollow space behind the trigger guard. Working carefully with a thin piece of metal, Maria managed to extract a tiny rolled piece of paper from the hidden compartment. Her hands shook as she unrolled it under her desk lamp. The paper contained what looked like a map fragment, showing partial geographic features and additional numbers written in the same careful handwriting as the rifle carving. At the bottom of the paper fragment, in Mitchell's handwriting, were the words, "For whoever carries this next, when the time comes, you'll know what to do. JM." Maria stared at the message and map fragment for hours, trying to understand what Mitchell had meant. What time was he referring to? What was she supposed to know how to do? And why had he gone to such elaborate lengths to hide this information in his rifle? The next morning, Maria made a decision that could change everything. Instead of reporting her discovery to the colonel or her superiors, she decided to investigate further on her own. Something told her that this information was meant specifically for her, and that involving others might put people in danger. Using her off-duty time, Maria began trying to match the map fragment with actual geographic locations. The partial features could correspond to dozens of different areas, but she focused on regions where Mitchell's unit had operated. She also tried to decode the additional numbers, wondering if they might be connected to the original coordinates carved into the rifle. After days of research, Maria made a breakthrough. The map fragment appeared to show part of a border region between Afghanistan and Pakistan, an area known for hidden caves and smuggling routes. The additional numbers, when combined with the original coordinates, seemed to point to a specific location in that region. But Maria's investigation was about to take a dangerous turn. Someone else had been watching her research activities, and they were not happy about what she was discovering. The secrets that James Mitchell had died protecting were still valuable to certain people, and those people would do anything to keep those secrets buried. Late one evening, as Maria was returning from the library, she noticed a black sedan with tinted windows parked near the barracks. The car hadn't been there earlier, and something about it seemed out of place on the military base. As she watched from a distance, she saw two men in civilian clothes exit the vehicle and walk toward the administration building. Maria's training instincts kicked in, and she realized she might be in danger. Whatever Mitchell had hidden in that rifle was apparently still important enough for people to be actively searching for it. And now that she had found it, she might have made herself a target. That night, Maria made copies of the map fragment and hid them in different locations around the base. She also wrote a detailed account of everything she had discovered and sealed it in an envelope, which she planned to give to Mrs. Patterson for safekeeping. If something happened to her, at least someone would know the truth about the rifle and its secrets. But Maria had no idea that the most dangerous part of her adventure was just beginning, and that the people looking for Mitchell's information were closer than she realized. Maria's suspicions about being watched proved correct when she arrived at her morning training session to find her locker had been searched. Nothing was missing, but her belongings had been carefully moved and replaced in slightly different positions. Someone with professional skills had gone through her possessions while she was sleeping, looking for something specific. The rifle was still secure in the weapons locker, but Maria noticed that other soldiers' equipment around hers had been disturbed as well. Someone had been systematically searching the entire armory, probably looking for Mitchell's weapon and whatever secrets it might contain. During her lunch break, Maria hurried to the library to check on Mrs. Patterson, but found the building closed with a sign saying the librarian was out sick. This was unusual because Mrs. Patterson prided herself on never missing work. Maria tried calling the library's main number, but no one answered. Growing increasingly worried, Maria decided to take a risk and visit Mrs. Patterson's home, which was located in the civilian housing area near the base. The elderly librarian lived in a small, neat house surrounded by flower gardens. But when Maria knocked on the door, Mrs. Patterson answered with obvious fear in her eyes. "Maria," Mrs. Patterson whispered, glancing nervously past her toward the street. "You need to leave immediately. Some men came to see me yesterday, asking questions about you and what research you've been doing. They weren't military personnel and they weren't friendly." Mrs. Patterson quickly explained that the men had claimed to be from a government agency, but they had no proper identification and had used intimidation tactics to try to get information. They wanted to know everything about Maria's research into military records and specifically about any weapons or equipment she had been investigating. "I didn't tell them anything," Mrs. Patterson assured her, "but they made it clear that they would be back if they didn't get the answers they wanted. Maria, whatever you've gotten involved in, it's dangerous. These men were professionals, and they're not going to give up." Maria realized that her investigation had attracted the attention of people who were willing to threaten an elderly librarian to get what they wanted. She thanked Mrs. Patterson and advised her to contact base security if the men returned, then hurried back to the base to figure out her next move. That evening, Maria decided to take one final risk. She needed to understand exactly what Mitchell had hidden and why it was still so important after 15 years. Using the map fragment and coordinates, she researched the location more thoroughly and discovered something shocking. The coordinates didn't just point to where Mitchell had made his famous shot. They also marked the location of a hidden cache of intelligence documents and evidence that Mitchell had discovered during the mission. According to the cryptic notes on the map fragment, Mitchell had found proof that the terrorist cell holding the hostages was being funded and supported by someone within the American intelligence community. Mitchell had realized that the rescue mission was actually a cover-up operation, designed to eliminate the hostages before they could reveal what they had learned about the corruption. But Mitchell's successful shot had saved the hostages, who were later able to provide testimony about the treasonous activities they had uncovered. The evidence Mitchell had hidden was apparently still buried at those coordinates, waiting for someone trustworthy to retrieve it. The people now searching for the rifle weren't trying to honor a war hero's memory. They were trying to destroy the last remaining proof of their crimes. Maria understood now why Mitchell had been so careful about hiding the information. He had known that powerful people would kill to keep their secrets buried, and he had needed a way to preserve the evidence for someone who could be trusted to use it properly. But Maria also realized that she was now in extreme danger. If these people were willing to threaten Mrs. Patterson and search military facilities, they would certainly be willing to harm or even kill a young recruit who had stumbled onto their secret. As she sat in her barracks that night, trying to decide what to do, Maria heard footsteps approaching her door. It was well past lights out, and no one should be moving around the building. She quickly hid the map fragment and Mitchell's note inside her pillowcase and pretended to be asleep. The footsteps stopped outside her door, and Maria heard the soft sound of someone trying the door handle. Her heart pounded as she realized that whoever was searching for Mitchell's information had decided to take more direct action. Through her barely opened eyes, she saw the door slowly open and a dark figure slip into the room. The intruder moved silently toward her locker, using a small flashlight to avoid waking the other soldiers. Maria watched in terror as the figure began working on her lock with professional tools, clearly intending to search her belongings more thoroughly than before. But the intruder had made one mistake. They hadn't noticed that Maria was awake and watching their every move. As the figure opened her locker and began searching through her gear, Maria carefully reached under her pillow and activated the emergency alert function on her military-issued communication device. Within minutes, base security would be alerted to an intruder in the barracks, but Maria knew that might not be fast enough to save her if the intruder discovered that she was awake and posed a threat to their mission. The next few minutes would determine whether Maria lived to reveal Mitchell's secrets or became another casualty in a 15-year-old cover-up operation. The rifle that had saved lives in Afghanistan was about to test whether it could protect the young soldier who now carried its burden. The intruder in Maria's room suddenly froze as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the barracks hallway. Security had responded faster than expected to her alert, and the dark figure quickly abandoned their search and moved toward the window. But they had miscalculated the building's layout, and there was no escape route from the second-floor room. Maria heard the security team entering the building, their radios crackling with urgent communications. The intruder realized they were trapped and turned toward Maria's bed, probably intending to use her as a hostage. But Maria was no longer the helpless recruit they expected to find. Rolling out of bed with the combat training she had been learning, Maria positioned herself between the intruder and the door, shouting for help. The intruder lunged toward her, but years of physical conditioning and weeks of carrying Mitchell's rifle had given Maria strength and reflexes she didn't know she possessed. The confrontation was brief but intense. Security officers burst into the room just as Maria managed to subdue the intruder, using the hand-to-hand combat techniques she had been practicing. The intruder turned out to be a middle-aged man in dark clothing, carrying professional surveillance equipment and lockpicking tools. Within an hour, Maria found herself back in Colonel Harrison's office, this time accompanied by several other officers she didn't recognize. The colonel's expression was grim as he explained that the intruder was actually a private contractor working for a group of former intelligence officials who had been trying to locate Mitchell's evidence for over a decade. Santos, the colonel said seriously, "It's time you knew the complete truth about James Mitchell and why his rifle ended up with you." The colonel revealed that he had not randomly assigned Maria to receive Mitchell's weapon. He had been specifically looking for a recruit with the right combination of skills, integrity, and determination to eventually uncover and preserve Mitchell's hidden evidence. Maria's exceptional marksmanship and investigative instincts had made her the perfect candidate. Mitchell didn't just carve those coordinates into his rifle as a memorial, the colonel explained. He carved them as a message to whoever would carry the weapon next. He knew that eventually, someone would discover the hidden compartment and follow the clues to the truth. The colonel then shared the complete story of Operation Compass Rose. Mitchell had indeed discovered evidence of corruption within the intelligence community during his final mission. Several high-ranking officials had been selling classified information to terrorist organizations, and the hostage situation had been created to eliminate agents who had learned too much. Mitchell's successful rescue had saved not only the hostages, but also crucial evidence of the treason. However, the corrupt officials had used their positions to cover up the investigation and eliminate most of the proof. Mitchell had managed to hide copies of the most damaging documents, but he died before he could reveal their location to proper authorities. The coordinates carved into that rifle, the colonel continued, mark the location where Mitchell buried a waterproof container with photographs, documents, and recorded testimony that prove the extent of the corruption. We've been waiting 15 years for someone trustworthy enough to retrieve that evidence. Maria realized that her entire military assignment had been carefully planned. The colonel had been watching her progress, waiting for her to demonstrate that she could handle the responsibility of Mitchell's legacy. Her investigation of the rifle and her courage in protecting the information had proven that she was the right person for the mission. Over the following weeks, Maria worked with a special military investigation team to plan a mission to recover Mitchell's hidden evidence. The operation required careful coordination with international authorities, since the cache was located in a politically sensitive border region. The mission itself was successful but dangerous. Maria, accompanied by a small team of specialists, traveled to the coordinates carved into Mitchell's rifle and found the buried container exactly where the map fragment had indicated. The evidence inside was even more damaging than expected, documenting years of treasonous activities and identifying multiple individuals who had betrayed their country. The revelations from Mitchell's evidence led to one of the largest corruption investigations in military history. Several former officials were arrested and charged with treason, while others were stripped of their security clearances and government pensions. The hostages from the original mission, now civilians, were finally able to provide their complete testimony without fear of retaliation. Maria's role in uncovering the truth earned her commendations and recognition throughout the military. But more importantly to her, she felt that she had honored the memory and sacrifice of James Mitchell. The rifle that had saved lives 15 years ago had found a way to continue serving justice and protecting innocent people. The weapon was eventually retired from active duty and placed in a military museum, with a complete display explaining Mitchell's heroism and Maria's investigation. The carved coordinates were preserved as a reminder that sometimes the most important messages are hidden in the most unexpected places. Maria continued her military career, specializing in intelligence and investigation work. She never forgot the lesson she had learned from Mitchell's rifle. That individual courage and determination could make a difference even when facing powerful enemies and overwhelming odds. The numbers 47, 23, 11, 89, 156, 2 became famous within military circles as a symbol of hidden heroism and the importance of preserving truth for future generations. And somewhere James Mitchell's spirit could finally rest, knowing that his final mission had been completed by someone worthy of carrying his legacy forward.